start here. We're going to get going here shortly. Wait for a few more people to arrive, and then we'll get going.
John, can you hear me?
Sure can.
Cool. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for, like John said, John, thanks for joining. Let's just give it a minute before we begin our presentation. Yeah. Hope everybody's had some coffee and is ready to see some technical screenshot of Splunk logs and good stories. Cool. I guess, hey, John, I think let's get started. It's 11:01. And hey, everyone, good morning. Thank you for joining our presentation on Better Together, which is leveraging Splunk detection from Splunk threat research team, STRT, and Cisco Talos. We do this tech talks every once a month, ranging them from topic to topic. And today we got the opportunity to talk about what's STRT and Splunk Talos are doing together. Just to go over our agenda real fast for today's presentation or the tech talk, which is introduction of who we are, what our teams do, what's the current state of integration between Splunk and Cisco, and we want to specifically talk about our recent detection development approach for the detections we've released between Splunk and Cisco, and how did we do this and all the details behind it. We want to talk a little bit about the upcoming work, and then we shall do Q&A. So to go forward is today's speakers is myself, Bhavin Patel, Senior Threat Researcher at Splunk. I've been here for about 9+ years, and I work on all sorts of adversary simulation and detection engineering efforts, and one of the primary maintainers of the ESCU app, which is how we ship content today at Splunk. And Nasruddin is one of my teammates who has extensively worked on this stuff. And unfortunately, he couldn't be present today, but he sends his best wishes and his excellent research to this Tech Talk. So that's Nas for you, and John, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bobbin. So my name is John. I am also senior security researcher slash technical leader in Cisco Talos. I've been in Cisco, about almost 8 years at this point. And yeah, primary focus, research and threats, and writing detections and protections to stop them. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, John. So, Splunk Threat Research Team, a little bit about us. Yes, I've been working with this team for a really long time now, and our primary charter is to essentially develop security content for Splunk customers and sort of like, over the last few years, we've, come up with like what are some of the things we do good and how do we do this then, right? Like how do we put out the research we do? So our basic, like our mostly our process, which looks like the following, which is we study a variety of threats, be it like an emerging threat, like, this SharePoint vulnerability which dropped over the weekend, or tracking some adversaries like remote access Trojan, some other malware families, and like just classic threats in like security products, like, what is happening in CrowdStrike alerts. So how do we surface those kind of intelligence in Splunk Enterprise Security? So we study those kind of threats. As a result, when we simulate these kind of behaviors in our lab environments, we end up creating all these data sets. We host these data sets publicly on Attack Data Repository, which I'll share the links later in the presentation. And based on these attack data sets, we build detections. These detections are tested against these simulated environments and simulated data sets of how adversaries tend to leave their footprints in logs. As a result, we also like to release a lot of tools, namely Content CTL, Attack Range. These are some of the tools that we have are very popular open source repositories at Splunk that we use actively to help build our research, and we share it with the community. And yeah, that's sort of our charter. And I'm happy to be working with a really old security team, Talos. And I want to let John talk a little bit about Talos and what he does there and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. As I said earlier, and as Bob just said, I'm on the Cisco Talos team. I'm specifically on a team within Talos called the Network Threat Detection and Response Team. And I wanted to take the next few slides to kind of talk about who Cisco Talos is, what the Network Threat Detection and Response Team is all about, and then tell you a little bit about the kinds of things we do and our workflow. So yeah. So first, kind of just want to talk kind of brief overview of who Cisco Talos is. Certainly wouldn't surprise me if many on the webinar are probably already familiar with Talos. But for those who aren't, quick 30-second summary, I would say, is that Talos is Cisco's trusted threat intelligence team. We are a team of we're security researchers. We have threat intelligence teams that go out and actually hunt threats, look at campaigns, try and find bad actors. We have a bunch of engineers, and it's so a very talented team, all primarily focused on kind of two main things. One, intelligence that includes providing the intelligence that you see associated with events in many of Cisco's products and services. It also includes, like I said, finding intelligence. We'll take IOCs, maybe an IP, maybe a file, and turn that into something actionable for the other teams within Talos to handle. And so that leads me to kind of the second main thing that Talos is responsible for, and that is writing many of the detections, protections, and security capabilities that are end up making their way into Cisco's products and services. So there's kind of four main categories of what those security offerings are. At the top, we have network security. Network security is the one that I'll be talking most about specifically, and that pertains to things like the intrusion prevention engines in Cisco's firewalls. And then very closely related to that, we have web security. Web security is similar, but focuses more on things like IP, domain, URL reputations, and content filtering, things like that. And then next we have email security. Email security, basically looking for bad things in emails. That includes malicious files, known malicious senders, phishing protection, things of that nature. And then last but not least, malware defense. We have a lot of talented reverse engineers and malware analysts on our team. And so, we'll reverse malware, analyze them, and then do everything from static, AV signatures all the way to more sophisticated behavioral signatures as well to kind of track what actors are doing kind of on a system or throughout a network. And so that's Talos as a whole. Now I next want to talk about my team specifically and what we do. So as I said at the top, I'm on the Network Threat Detection and Response team. We call it NTDR for short. And as you may be able to surmise, our primary focus is writing detection for network-based threats. We do this through SNORT. I'm sure many are probably already familiar with SNORT. But SNORT is the main intrusion prevention / detection engine in Cisco's firewalls. So that includes Cisco Secure Firewall, of course. It includes Meraki devices, and so forth. And so our primary focus, similar to what Bhavin said on his team, they research threats, and then they write detections for via Splunk detections. We do the same through SNORT rules, and we cover we analyze and we look at everything from vulnerabilities, things like O days and N days, like Bhavin called out the SharePoint one. That obviously was one we were paying very closely attention to and wrote detections for, and then of course we also do the same for malware. So we look at malware CNC traffic, we look at payload deliveries, pretty much anything under the sun. If it's bad and if it's something that traverses a network, chances are we're looking at it, and chances are we are thinking about how we can write coverage for it and get protections out for our customers. So that's kind of what we do. Now I want to tell you all about how we do it. So this will probably look similar to the slide that Bhavin had up for their team. One thing I'll say, and one thing that's really facilitated the collaborations our teams have been able to do, is that our workflows and the kinds of threats we look at, they're very complementary to each other. So we kind of have a very similar process. First and foremost, we triage threats. As I'm sure many of you all are all aware, there are tons of new threats, new vulns, new malware campaigns, new malicious files popping up every single day. And so one of the most important things to get right is proper triaging of those threats. The way we triage them is probably similar to how most security teams do and defenders do. Is we try and identify the ones that we think are going to be high impact. So we look at, we pay attention to CVSS scores. We pay attention to metrics like EPSS to try and assess, how likely is a vulnerability going to be exploited. And then, we also do our own analysis. Like, for example, the SharePoint vulnerability recently, it was unauthenticated remote code execution effectively. And so that one, would jump to the top of our priority list. And then once we've triaged threats, then we kind of get into, we want to reproduce those threats. If we have a POC, we'll run a POC, get some attack traffic. And then from that attack traffic, we'll start writing our SNORT rules. When we write SNORT rules, there's kind of two main things that we try and, or two main metrics that we try and look at when we're writing SNORT rules. Those are performance and efficacy. Performance is critical for us because we don't want to write rules that are going to, potentially cause network degradations for our customers or slow down our customer sensors, things like that. And so we pay very close attention to any rules that maybe use some expensive rule options or rule options that or rules that tend to unnecessarily spend CPU cycles on our devices, things like that. And then secondly, the efficacy point, put simply, that what that means to us is we want to detect and block things that we want to detect, and then conversely, we want to not detect and not block things that we don't want to detect. So this, of course, true positives, false negatives, things of that nature. And so whenever we're writing SNORT rules, it's kind of an iterative process. It's a continuing process, and we're paying close attention to attack variants. With vulnerability or with exploits, you often have a lot of attackers often have a lot of creative ways to obfuscate and hide their exploits. And so we have to always be a couple steps ahead of them. And then lastly, once we've done our triaging, done our analysis, written rules, and then we release package up rules a couple times a week, and that's the gist. So that's kind of how what our workflow looks like. As you can see, very complementary to STRT and the work that they do. And now I think I'm going to hand it back to Bob, and he's going to talk about some of the current integrations between Talos and Splunk.
Cool. Thanks, John. So yeah, like you guys probably heard, there is like a lot which Cisco does in terms of its product offerings and kind of research it taps into. And all of this like primary intelligence is Talos is gathering it somewhere. So like the current state of integration or the very first things, Splunk, we can easily build in Splunk. It's very effective for what it is. And these were things which were launched last year, right? We at .conf, which was just about a year ago. Can't believe .conf is coming up again. We released some integrations, right? Like which was a Talos intelligence connector, for Splunk SOAR, one for enterprise security, which does all this enrichment related to IOCs, which Talos has, based on all their research and what they're seeing in customer environments and things of that nature. We also had like a connector for threat intelligence from Splunk Attack Analyzer, which is formerly known as TwinWave at Splunk. We connected them with Talos Intelligence so that our Attack Analyzer customers can also get like more information from what the Talos research speaks to this, right? That was the current state of integration, right? And then one of the other things which we are actively pursuing at Splunk here is called this gold standard TA effort, right? Where I think the Splunk as a whole has understood the value of how data coming into Splunk like really affects the way people look at that data set. And some of what these fields translate into, things like that, like really reflect in product and the way you write detections. So Splunk-based team at Splunk is taking and running an effort for gold standard TAs for Cisco integrations, right? Like you heard from John, right? We have Cisco is like a lot of product offerings, and all of these products are creating data sets. And these are like valuable data sets or in terms of, finding attacker footprint if things went wrong, right? So you would be wanting to ingest some of these data sets from like, say, for example, now what we're going to focus on for this this specific tech talk is the Cisco Secure Firewall Threat Defense product. It's basically a firewall, right, which essentially gets data sets where you can run snorts, things of that nature from your environment. So specifically speaking of Cisco firewall data, we are going to use, we in our lab, like in order to produce this research, we created a lab environment, ran some endpoints behind it. We'll show you in the demo how that looks like. But for all intensive purposes of this presentation right now, there's a way you can get using this app, Cisco Security Cloud app. You can get FTD data, which is the firewall data, in terms of two fashion, using eStreamer and syslog. It can also provide lots of different types of ASA data, which is the old school Cisco firewall network logs. It can give you all the network sessions, VPN start and end time, The ASA alert itself, you can configure things on their console to get those alerts back into Splunk. And you can also configure some policy information, right? Like what's the current policy of your firewalls, who's changing them, all these kind of data sets can be ingested into Splunk. And for our research right now, like we used a way called eStreamer. eStreamer is a protocol developed by Cisco. It's essentially used to stream all these firepower events, threat defense events into any kind of application, right? So now that Splunk is a part of Cisco, like we, decided to take all these events and ingest them into Splunk and see how that looks like, right? And today, they support two types of events, which is binary events, and then there are fully qualified events. Fully qualified events are basically events where every network traffic is sort of inspected and delivered to you in form of a JSON blob, where it tells you a lot more richer information about a particular network connection, and we can see some more details. But the fully qualified events in terms of I want to focus on these 4 events which are given by Cisco eStreamer today. And here are some of the details of it, right? So when you get all these Cisco events into Splunk, from the firewall threat defense events, essentially, we are getting like 4 different types of events, all of them super rich from a security perspective. And the events look like something like this, right? There's a connection event, which tells you what connection happened, which machine is talking to whom, and what URI was being accessed, right? And you can see much more richer information about what application was used, what fingerprint was of the application, things like that. And then from the same machine or from the same log, you can also get information related to file events, where, which files were downloaded on that machine, which file was uploaded, what is the qualification of that file download, right? Some metadata around it. And then the third is the most interesting one from our collaboration perspective was the intrusion event, where an intrusion event is actually an event where a SNORT ID has triggered for a particular host. And then you can see the intrusion packets. These are much more detailed packets of what exactly the intrusion event was. So you can like decode the packet information to actually tell you what information was really accessed. And to go into I want to go, in quick details on like what each of these event looks like in Splunk. This is how a connection event looks like. There's a connection ID, which actually helps you connect different sessions as well. There is an important process over here called EVE_process. Now, this is actually one of the features of Cisco, where without decrypting the traffic, they try to identify what process it probably belongs to based on its intelligence, right? So we can use some of these fields from a connection event. Similarly, from a file event, you can see, what kind of file was being downloaded, what's the direction of the file, what is the type of the file, some kind of like Cisco-based enrichments as well, which is like the SHA disposition. Does it think it's a malware? Does it think it's not a malware? False positive or not, these enrichments are good, and it is good to have from just a pure research perspective and try to see how these threat actors may be behaving in your environment. The third event, which is one of the events which we Talos and STRT collaborated extensively on, is like these SNORT ID events. So the event which you're seeing on a screen right now is essentially like a SNORT ID, which John and team built from the NTDR perspective. And when these rules fire in SNORT, when the SNORT IDs fire, these are some of the intrusion events and intrusion packets that are created. But then, so these are all intrusions are like, when it comes to SNORT, right? It sits on your network. Think about it. It sits on a network parameter, and it takes an instance of a packet, and it understands it, and then it creates an alert based on what the rules are written for us, right? But then when you put all this data into Splunk, like one of the most obvious things where we saw, like we can see this whole attack at a much larger perspective. over a much larger time frame. And you can combine all these different kind of snort alerts together to sort of like give you a high fidelity picture of like, okay, is this for real, right? Are we seeing these kind of attacks in our data sets? When you seeing them on a larger picture, when you combine some of these different behaviors together, and um, and um, and and that was when actually we were thinking of like building a detection which speaks to this kind of behavior. And for that, we went to John's team to ask like, hey, what are the kind of detections, you guys create? What are these alerts? Like, what does snort alert look like? So I will let John speak about a bit more about NTDR's detection types, and before we go into what Splunk street detections look like.
Perfect. Thanks, Bob.
Well,
Yeah, absolutely. It's a, I think it's a good question. It's like, what are these intrusion events? What are they, what are they events of? What are those rules firing on? And so, I want to kind of, talking about the work that our team does. We write snort rules for vulns and malware, but I want to get a little more specific and kind of provide a little more context into, how we think about detection, and then the various kinds of detection types we write. So I've tried to visualize it kind of like a pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid we have our detections that I think of that are very targeted. They're very specific. They target maybe exploitation of specific CVEs. Maybe they're looking for a CNC structure associated with a particular campaign or a sample. And so I like to kind of refer to those as atomic or one-off detections. They're really meant to focus on very specific things. They're meant to be very high fidelity. Going back to what I said earlier about wanting to make sure that the rules alert on only what it is they should be alerting on. That's exactly kind of what these atomic rules are for. And then going down a layer below that, we have our more generic or our indicator rules. These are, when we write these, we're usually detecting something that we're confident is malicious, but maybe the event or maybe what we're detecting is not tied to a specific incident. Maybe it's not tied to a specific CVE. So the example I might give for this one, maybe if our atomic rule is targeting a specific directory traversal vulnerability in a web application, maybe our generic and indicator rule is just looking for a traversal sequence. And so it's kind of just a bit more stepping into a bit more of an abstract layer than those atomic detections. And then below those two, we have our rules that or we have our detections that detect things that kind of blur the line between outright malicious versus benign. We call these policy violations and anomalies. Policy violations are typically things that detect events that maybe a customer or a handful of customers or many customers would deem suspicious in their particular environments. But then on the flip side, maybe there are customers that are okay with these kinds of potential violations. So, for example, maybe like resetting a password of an account, we consider, or maybe it's an admin account, we might consider that to be some sort of policy violation. And by writing a snort rule to target that, we can effectively create events for it when that happens in a customer environment, and it allows us to, at the very least, flag, say, hey, this thing happened in your environment. You might want to go take a look at it. And then lastly, I have on there anomalies. So anomalies, anomalies are one of the more interesting ones that we've been paying close attention to with the recent collaborations with the Splunk team. And these anomaly rules typically detect events that probably by themselves they're not malicious, but when when we combine them with maybe other anomalies or maybe a policy violation or maybe an indicator rule, then those anomalies start to be an important piece of the story. Maybe and so those will get into my next couple of slides where we talk about what these different kinds of rules are, and then how we can use each of these with the Splunk team and the detections they write to kind of put these pieces together. So here's I want to, kind of offer an example of a snort rule to kind of make it a little more concrete what we're talking about. So this would be an example of an atomic snort rule that we write. This one in particularly looks for exploitation of an SQL injection vulnerability in a specific web application. And so this rule, as you can see, it's very targeted. We're looking for a specific path, this PDF servlet. We're looking for a particular query parameter, job ID, and then furthermore, we're looking for SQL injection characters in that parameter. And so this is an atomic. We consider this an atomic detection because it's meant to detect exploitation of a specific vuln, a specific threat. And then if we go to the next slide and talk about what an anomaly detection rule might look like. So this one is this rule detects an inbound SSH connection to a non-standard SSH port. Of course, SSH typically runs on TCP port 22. However, some server admins or may want to run SSH on a port other than 22, and that's totally okay. But we call this an anomaly because it's anomalous behavior. By and large, I think most SSH traffic or most network traffic typically occurs on those standard ports, so SSH 22. And so if you see an inbound connection, an inbound SSH connection to a TCP port other than 22, we consider that anomalous. And so this rule might be interesting for our team or for a customer or for Splunk specifically, because attackers do use techniques like this anomalous behavior to kind of blend in with normal traffic. Of course, there are things living off the land techniques that attackers use, and then of course also just wanting to blend in, make it difficult. Attackers try and make it difficult for our teams to detect malicious behavior. And so because of that, we will write these anomaly rules that are there that for customers to turn on if they choose to do so. So those are two examples. Now in the next slide, I want to talk about kind of how the STRT is able to use all these different types of rules to help produce better security outcomes for our customers. So one of the things that our two teams have been working on recently is leveraging kind of the best of both of our products. So if you take the firewall, if you take Snort, for example, and what it's best at. Snort, as Bhavin said earlier, it sits on the edge. It sits in a firewall, of course, which is a lot of times is the entry. The network, of course, is the entry point for attacks and how attackers typically get into networks and environments. And so Snort has tons of visibility, and it allows us to detect, pretty much any event or anything that comes across the wire. So that includes, going back to the previous slide, that includes the specific exploits or vulnerabilities that we want to detect. And then at the other end of the spectrum, it allows us to detect those anomalous events. So maybe it is an inbound SSH connection to some, I don't know, port 444 or something like that. And so Snort in the firewall has this visibility into basically how attackers try and get in to networks, and then how they try and pivot and do all of those types of techniques. And then combining what Snort's good at with what Splunk is good at, which is kind of ingesting logs from all different types of, go back to that. Thank you. And then so take what Snort's best at, combine it with what Splunk's best at, which is ingesting non-Snort events basically from all the various Cisco products that Bhavin talked about earlier. That includes file events, connection events, includes things like authentication logs or process event activity, and so forth. And so Splunk just has, also has really good visibility into anything that occurs in customer environments. And so what our two teams have been able to do is combine these capabilities. We've been able to produce some detection types, some net new detections that we weren't able to create previously, and it allows us to continue to stay two steps ahead of bad actors out there. And so I think Bob in the next slide is going to talk about some of those specific examples.
Cool. Thanks, John. Yeah, I think John mentioned it right over there, that it is once we see all these data sets in Splunk, right? And we started like talking to each other about like what kind of research are they putting out, what are the new snort, kind of like behaviors they are looking at. While we were doing our existing detection release for FTD, we also exactly to realize that we can use all these snort IDs, which specifically attributes to specific behavior in Cisco's world. And we started putting these IDs together in like a short period of time. So what you're seeing on screen is like a detection search for Veeam exploitation activity, which was kicked in a lot in the last earlier this year. And over here, you can see that we are looking for these intrusion events, like there are different IDs. If you're seeing all these things snapping at the, firing in a time window of 5 minutes, this may mean there's a higher fidelity kind of like activity happening specifically related to Veeam backup servers getting exploited. And when we looked at one of these detections, right, it was like very obvious to us that, hey, we should build a hunting dashboard based on these kind of correlations. So the very next thing we did was we simulated a bunch of activity in our environment, had a bunch of snort events fire, and then create data sets, right? Create file events, create all sorts of stuff in our lab environment. And Nas and I sort of like went ahead and built this dashboard, which is a very clear way of understanding. It's basically using a bunch of snort IDs, which are mapped to a threat actor. And we are looking for those activities happening within a short period of time. And then we are pivoting from that threat to seeing the file events, seeing what are other risk events in Splunk Enterprise Security. We are seeing some kind of timeline, things of that nature. Thanks to this new set of data sets coming from our lab. And we unfortunately don't have too much time for going through this dashboard. However, I do have a small demo that I would want to share with you guys. And let me quickly bring it up. 1 second. Cool. I'm hoping you guys are able to see my QuickTime player with a demo screen. It's a pre-recorded demo made last week, and I'm just gonna play it and walk you through what took us to build this research, to put the detections out, and how does this look like in Splunk and things of that nature. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and play it. Step one, we always build an environment to build data sets like I was talking about earlier. So this is how the lab environment looks like. To begin with, we have some Linux and Windows endpoints, which are producing, log activities. And then we have the Cisco FTD and FMC, which is the firewall we have configured in front of those machines. And then we ingest all of this data into Splunk. This may take a little bit to set it up, right? But once you have it all wired, or once you have a FMC, at least if you have set up in your environment, it's really easy to get data into Splunk. So we configured everything end to end. This is how the management center looks like on the Cisco side of the house, where they are tracking some information as well. Step two is to explore these kind of logs, right? So once we start seeing all these logs in Splunk, the typical way we do is we just go hit that index up and ask, like, just start looking at things, right? Like, what's going on here? What other kinds of logs are we seeing here? And then one interesting information that we found in our research was these event types. I think earlier I spoke about this event type slide. right? There are different types of events which are created by FMC. And we saw like, hey, there's a lot of connection events happening. We also saw some intrusion events and these packets being created. So it was kind of exciting to firstly see like how an attack straight translated into like 20,000 events, which told me something nice and informational. These can be voluminous, right? Connection events are voluminous. This is how it looks like. I want to also go quickly into one intrusion event. I'll pause the demo there for just a hot second where we are tracking like, Microsoft Crypto API is actually making some request, which is tripping on Snort. So even though this may be a false positive or not a false positive, it's something that Microsoft Crypto API should not be doing. So these are some of the things it's tripping on, and then it's nice to see how some of these high fidelity things can come together when you start correlating them. I'm going to continue with the demos. These are some of the file events that we referred to earlier. It tells you the direction of the file, the hash of the file, what's the name of the file, things like that. Now, step 3, we explore detections in ESCU. So now, fun fact that we've already built all these like behaviors, this is weird stuff that you should be looking at into our into enterprise security content updates. So this is the UI of ES. You'd go to the use case library to view the specific research, and then you go to Cisco Secure Firewall Threat Defense Analytics. Now, this has got about, say, 24 different detections catering to different behaviors. This is how it looks like in ES. And the way I like to run things and test things is, I would install this app, see what's going on. I'll go read the search description. It will tell you what the search is trying to do. This is one specific search, which is around file event, right? We are tracking some file events, which are typically, not be supposed to be used by organizations at times. You can configure this, you can understand these results, how it looks like over here. So you run the search, you try to see what results are coming out of your environment before, if you guys are already FTD customers. And if not, then I highly encourage to start speaking about these kind of data sets in your organizations. This is how a connection event search is like, right? We are looking for connections happening to Dropbox, Pastebin, all sorts of like these weird file sharing things, which attackers typically use, to like communicate. You can find artifacts of these. And then we see if there's a lot of more connections happening or less connections happening. Sometimes it's passing thresholds. There are like variety of different ways where you can address these, track these behaviors. And we've shared some of the ways, right, using these detections. This was the detection which, I was talking about earlier, where we are tracking a bunch of adversaries and mapping to specifics. So what we've done here is like taken a bunch of threat actors, mapped their specific snort IDs, what they attribute to, and then created a lookup of like how many distinct IDs should you be seeing within 24 hours of time, for example. And then using those kind of like searches, and in our lab environment, at least, we found some success in tracking these adversary behaviors using snort IDs. So this is what John was referring to earlier, that intelligence lives in John's repository, and then he tells us, and then we also build a search around that. And this is how an example search sort of like triggers looks like. And this is from our strictly a lab, but I encourage you guys to run it in your environment and see how this dashboard or this search sort of finds. And if it doesn't find anything, then we should look into ways to improve it and things of that nature. Step 4 is in ESCU. Now we have an onboarding assistant. We released it earlier this year. It's basically a way to have all your Splunk detections for an analytics story enabled for you quickly. So you go to that assistant, you select the Cisco Secure Firewall story. Like you can see, 31 detections are already available, which I'm able to run it at least in my lab environment, right, where the data is coming in. So I select all these data sets. You can look, totally recommend using default times for now. It just helps with better scheduling and it's smarter that way. So yeah, you can, walk through this wizard and enable a bunch of detections and get started with looking at some of the Cisco FTD data sets. And once these are enabled, it takes a little bit depending on your Splunk server capacity. But once it's enabled, it's automatically configured to see risk events and findings in enterprise security, where you can further understand what this alert meant, how you can tune it. The journey doesn't end at enabling; it like barely just starts, right? So then you can see all the fun stuff happening behind the scenes. So now let me quickly share the presentation again. Nice. So what I showed you right now, it's already being released. So the content released so far is one analytics story, compasses all our detections together. We also put a one threat hunting dashboard, which is in the ESCU app. If you can install the latest, you can go to dashboards and check it out. You need to configure a little things, right? Everything in Splunk needs a little bit of configuration, but it goes a long way. And we've described all of those things, with a technically detailed blog, which was also authored by a team earlier this year. Yeah, like some of the key. So this thing started earlier this year, right? We did not know, at least I did not know. Nas would speak differently, I guess, but he started with this research much earlier than I did. I stepped in a little late. But there's a few things I learned personally. There's a lot of, I'm always very excited when I have to address security use cases in like with a new data set, right? We're all used to Sysmon. We're all, it was kind of not getting boring, I would say, but it's always very nice to see what this new data set creates. So Cisco FTD, I was honestly very surprised at how rich the telemetry was, at least from a lab perspective, from understanding an adversary perspective, things of that nature. We were able to quickly, after speaking to each other, after knowing our release workflows were kind of similar, our working style was similar, it was nice to see how our research can also complement each other. And I don't know, John, if you want to say like what you think was good about the collaboration and how do you see Splunk helping Cisco customers and vice versa?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would first echo, pretty much everything you just said in terms of it's been fantastic working, our team, NTDR and STRT, a lot of, as you can probably see, a lot of shared interests. We all kind of have the same common goal of writing detections and doing what we can to protect customers from bad activity. And so it's been, really, it's been great to work with each other in terms of sharing of intel, whether their team comes across a few hashes, a few samples, some IPs, domains, and sharing those back and forth, kind of allows our teams to, continue to collaborate on detections. It allows us to say, hey, we wrote this snort rule that detects this, but we also saw, this, maybe it's a piece of malware. We also saw this malware spawn a process, and so we could say, hey, STRT, could you all take those two events, put them together, and make a detection out of it? And so it's been really cool. It's opened up a lot of detection capabilities. Not for our team, of course. Going back to what I said earlier about the anomalies. Being able to take anomaly rules, multiple anomaly rules, maybe a combination of those with some targeted rules. And put them together and be able to detect a lot more than what we could do with just snort. And so it's been really cool. And then lastly, yeah, as Bobbin had said, we set up a few workflow integrations. We set up some processes to really continue to facilitate this collaboration, the sharing of intel, detection collaborations. And so we've, as you said, we've already put out a lot of detections already, and we're gonna continue to do that. So yeah, been really cool. So
Cool. Hey, thanks, John. So yeah, nice segue onto, what's next? What's coming out of Street and Talos teams hanging out together. What we're already working on a bunch of other problems and effective ways of helping and leveraging new sort of telemetry from Cisco. So the next thing which is already available is Cisco Network Visibility Module. You can think about NVM as, um, Sysmon Event ID 3 on steroids. It tells you a lot of different things. We have already shipped detections for Cisco NVM, Cisco Duo, which is another product of Cisco, which helps with authentication and 2FA and things of that nature. And there's a bunch of like nefarious stuff you can do with Duo specifically. And you can find the artifacts of those activity in these new Duo detection data sets that we published. Upcoming products like Thousand Eyes, Cisco Meraki. I don't know. I think Cisco has a lot. So it'll depend on what are we seeing from a customer perspective, what gives, a customer the richest value for what is best bang for the buck, I guess, in terms of telemetry, right? Because these things can be voluminous and you can often get lost in the noise, so to speak. Just want to quickly talk about what's already available. NAS work extensively again on these detections. Unfortunately, yeah, he couldn't be present here, but he'd be happy to answer some questions later. However, yeah, this is Cisco NVM. Highly recommended. It looks like Sysmon Event ID on 3 is Event ID 3 on steroids, like I said. Offers a lot of insights on processes, like, process initiating network connection. What does that whole picture looks like? There are around 14 detections already available where we can leverage, coal connecting to paste pin, stuff of that nature. Highly recommended. Another set of detections, which I'm sure we'll soon have a detailed blog for. Which actually, by the way, as of today, we already have that blog. So I'll paste you guys the link regarding NVM stuff as well, apart from FTP. And brings us to the next slide, which is Q&A. And we want to open up the floor to like people, please send in questions, happy to answer them live while we have some next 10 minutes. I don't know, John, if you have anything to answer or
yeah,
do we have any questions?
Yeah, looks like I got a few questions in the chat. Let's see. The first one: Are there newsworthy vulnerabilities that Talos NTDR team has detected and remediated faster than other vendors? I assume blog post. So that's a good question. I can't really speak to the cadence and how quickly other vendors are pushing out detections and where Talos and NTDR fits in there. But what I can say is that we almost any time there's a newsworthy vulnerability. So I'm gonna call it the SharePoint one just because it's I think one of the most recent ones. Anytime there's a vulnerability or there's a threat like that, we jump on it immediately. We're looking we're looking for actionable intel. We're looking for POCs. We're looking for any binaries or any source code we can look at to try and understand the vulnerability or the threat. And then if a threat is something we deem critically important not for our customers, we will typically write coverage for that and push it out to customers as quickly as we possibly can. And so, we do that. We did that with the SharePoint vulnerability specifically. We actually give a shout out to our team. We actually had coverage for that in last week prior to it kind of setting the internet on fire. Yeah, I mean that's kind of our process for those kinds of things. We almost always, whether it's Friday night or a weekend day, if something's going happening on the internet, a vuln, a threat, we're typically on top of it and getting coverage out as quickly as possible. So yeah, hope that. And then the blog post, yeah, typically, I think we pushed out a blog post about this SharePoint threat specifically on talosintelligence.com. But yeah, anytime there's something noteworthy, there's a noteworthy threat. I remember Log4j, we had a whole one of that vuln back in 2021, 2020, whenever it was. We had blog posts about that. So yeah, we're almost always trying to keep our customers, Snort customers, Cisco customers, uh, you know, keep them apprised of what's going on and what coverage we have for them. So yeah. And the second question is is the Talos Intel add-on for Splunk Cloud ES part of the license? Bobbin, I think that one probably for you.
I think that was probably not most likely for me, but I'll have to get back to you guys regarding licensing before I say anything incorrect. To be honest, John. Yeah.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Cool. And then from Kenton, have you seen any changes in the threat landscape that you could attribute to growing use or accessibility of AI, excluding phishing applications? Do you have any predictions regarding AI use for cyber attacks? Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, a lot of interest in that right now. In terms of the threat landscape, I've seen a few things. Obviously, you called out phishing. That's the obvious one. But I've also seen attackers and researchers utilize LLMs to write POCs. I think I saw a blog post a couple weeks ago. It was a credible blog post. It was a vendor that had or a security research vendor that actually was using LLMs to write legitimate POCs. And I don't think the LLMs were writing full working weaponized POCs from scratch. But what I think they were doing is kind of feeding it. They already had some information about a vuln. Maybe they had a code diff or something, and they were feeding the LLM details about that and kind of writing it piecemeal. And so I certainly think there is, that's only, the prevalence of that is only going to go up. LLMs are pretty powerful. I think we're all, pretty well aware of that by now. And so the capabilities, of course, extend into, the security and the exploit domain. And then, the other thing I'll say about that is on the flip side, we also, I think I have, and I'm sure a lot of other researchers have seen this too, but we've seen kind of an uptick of kind of fake POCs. I think a lot, one of the places we go to look for exploits is GitHub. And I think now we sometimes have to look at POCs we see there with kind of a skeptical eye. Sometimes it's pretty obvious when a POC up there is fake, but sometimes not. And so, we just have to continue to be diligent, which we always do. But yeah, I'd say in terms of like writing exploits, there's always that is a thing now, and I'm sure only going to keep being a thing. So yeah, I don't know, Bobbin, did you have anything you've seen particularly that you wanted to?
No, I think you see, from a Splunk perspective, what happens is like there are two things. From a research perspective, it's like, of course, there are some serious issues when it comes to from a model perspective, right? Like, what are you asking to the model? How are you asking? What's the response? Who's manipulating the weights? Things of that nature. So we are getting, but that's a pure new research. Like we don't really know how organizations are using it now in order to like kind of like build the detections around it and ship it. However, we are seeing some kind of upticks around those kind of things, right? Like from a security perspective that, hey, how do you manage these API calls? Like who gets access to what and how the computation occurs. Some of these are very open questions, but from a street perspective, like our team gets to work with those kind of new upcoming research. I guess I would say from an attack perspective, I think John summarized a lot, like, yeah, fake exploits, but a lot of like experimentation related to using AI, but not like fully flourished yet, right? But I fully suspect, these things are going to get very mature, and and there's going to be a lot of code written around it to make sure that you use these tooling because it works. So because we can see that it works, right? It works in situations, let's just say. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of uptake, and I think we should actively think about how do you defend against that kind of adversary, and I think it's going to be exciting. Yeah, John, I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I guess the last thing, you talk about the accessibility of AI. I mean, the LLMs, I think probably all use them to see how they write code. And so, it kind of just opens the door for other security researchers or just other bad actors taking advantage of them. So, something we're going to have to absolutely keep an eye on. And then you got another question from JW. I think it says, how do you handle Cisco with OT as far as inventory? I'm not sure, Bobbin, does that question?
Operational, I'm guessing OT is operational data. I'm exactly not sure what OT means, but and let me note down that question. I'm fairly certain that there is a way to onboard data, but I would have to get back to you.
Sounds
Sorry.
good. Yeah, sorry about that. And then Brian, going back to the SharePoint vulnerability, where can I find that detection? It's a good question. I will find the link to our blog and then I'll put it in the chat. That's good. But going back to what I said about earlier, talking about some of the newsworthy vulnerabilities. Typically speaking, if there's a vulnerability like this one, like the SharePoint one, or any vulnerability that is kind of setting the internet on fire, chances are we're going to have a blog post about it. We want to keep all of our customers informed of, to let them know, like, hey, we're on top of it. We've written detections for it and we've released them. And almost always, if it has to do with snort coverage, it will almost always be on talosintelligence.com. But yeah, I'll find the specific blog and I will link it for you here in just a second. So, thanks.
Thanks. And what else? I think that's the last of the question. Well, but I'm happy to answer. Please ask us more questions if if you have any. All of this research is available on research.splunk.com. You can find artifacts of all these kind of detections that we put out. There is also like a cool timeline feature on our website, which I'm sure Jose is very proud of. It really gives you a timeline of like how our release structures work, like when did we release what, helps you see all kinds of different things historically as well, which is super cool. So I highly encourage you guys to check it out. Yeah, if you are Splunk customers and are able to come to .conf, you please more than welcome. It's gonna happen in Boston after a really long time. It usually happens in Vegas, but I'm excited to be in Boston, like talking about similar stuff, and hope to see you guys there. And I don't know, John, if you have anything to add more, but I think we are just over time now.
Yeah, sounds great. Looks like we got one more question if we want to. I think we can probably squeeze it in here. I'm guessing this one is for you. It says, is closer integration with Cisco XDR expected in the near future? I assume that is asking about Splunk integration.
Yeah, I think so too. I would like to think so. Yes, Cisco XDR has got a bunch of nice data coming in, similar to Sysmon, things of that nature. We are looking at we're definitely looking at because we have detections. ESU today has detections which cater to XDR stuff. We just have to see how it marries well with both the products' capability. But I can't commit to it. But if XDR is something which is needs to be looked at, our team will be really happy to. But yeah, a closer integration with a lot of Cisco products is certainly happening. That's what I I can see from a security content perspective. And of course, right, whatever is the emerging threat, the best way to stop a threat is what I think from a log perspective is what any team should be going and aspiring to do. So we'll be, yeah, look at all sorts of log data. And operational technology add-on, Emma. Yeah, I think I'll just have to get back to you on that. I don't know if there's any specific integration, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is one already in the works. So let me just get back to you on that. I'll make sure we have someone from our team get back to you. Thank you. I guess I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. Well, if you don't have any more questions, I'm happy to stay on. But people feel free to drop, continue with your day. Hope to see you on one of these really soon. And thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate everyone joining and listening. And yeah, it was great. Hope everyone got a little something out of it. So thank you.